Fascinating things to subscribe to anywhere. Back right after this. Okay, back with Clif High of halfpasthuman.com. This part 4 issue is fascinating. May I read just a little bit of one to give people an idea? This particular section is called Terra, Alternative Duality, Tempting Temples, Emotive Sheer Winds. What does that mean? Just for openers.
Well, the titles are reflective of the content found within the various entities.
Right, I understand that. The Terra is the general category here.
Is a container, if you will, that we use to represent those things such as weather, climate, earthquakes, those things that relate to the human emotional condition relative to the planet. All this is seen from the human viewpoint.
Right.
So, for instance, we might say traumatic winds or dramatic rains, because in this case, what we're picking up is everything is emotional, and so we see that we pick up the precursors to some level of a dramatic weather event. So earlier in the year, George Ure was on radio talking, I believe, on like the 2nd of January, about the traumatic winds that we'd seen as basically a theme for the whole year.
Right.
And we were quite correct. And the number of tornadoes is exceptional. Their ferocity is exceptional. The amount of damage is exceptional. Yeah. Whereas we've had years where we were focused on earthquake. And it appears to a certain extent that the years and the times we're in are somewhat thematic, as strange as that may sound, as though we're all playing out a script. And, one set of year conditions are going to be towards a particular type of nasties, if you will. And then in the next year we get, for instance, floods or winds or whatever.
Well, you mentioned tornadoes. We have hurricane season coming, too.
Correct. And we're somewhat worried about that. We're getting a lot of the same language now that we had initially gotten a similar effect, I want to say about May. So prior to Katrina Rita, we'd started easily 6 weeks, but probably a little bit longer than that, maybe as long as 3 months before, because we were looking at it in shorter-term data values at the time. And we'd gotten a precursor saying, basically, giant storm coming, American diaspora, and talking about how the powers that be would be a little bit upset with the response of the Dark Companion. And at the time, the Dark Companion was an unknown archetype to us, but it was obviously the faces, the dark faces seen on the CNN, and that were as broad as they were tall, and the archetypes there were rather descriptive. But that's when we get into the interpretation part, and it sort of falls down.
The interpretation part is the tricky part. That's the tough part, because a lot of this is it's metaphorical, I guess, in some respects. It's just hard. It's hard to know for sure. How far out do the forecasts? Can you dial in a window? Like, let's look ahead 6 months. Let's look ahead 6 years. Or do you just take what you get?
No, to a certain extent, we can do that based on the values that we've previously assigned to language. So, for instance, we have what we call there's an array of values that are associated with each and every one of these words. Many of the arrays are not fully populated because the word just doesn't have that much emotional impact. But some language, for instance, like legal language, has a great deal of emotional impact. And so we might have that one very well populated. And some of these values go to immediacy, to how long the impact is going to last, the duration, the intensity of the emotional impact from this context, this word, etc. So some of the words within our total lexicon have very far-ranging and far-reaching values associated with them, and through those values we can indeed look to a specific time frame, if you will. However, once you're getting into that, you, for instance, going way out, you lose granularity. There aren't that many words that are associated with very distant time, especially given the nature of humans this present day.
So your window of highest and best comfort and confidence would be, what, 6 to 12 months out?
Actually, we break the values down into 3 groups. immediacy, which is 3 days to 3 weeks inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Shorter term, which is these sort of fade together, but it's 3 weeks out to 3 months inclusive.
Uh-huh.
And then longer term, which is 3 months and beyond. So our best value set appears to be hovering around shorter term, which is to say somewhere between 3 months and, say, 7 months. We get a lot more detail than we would any other time.
3 to 7 months. Uh-huh.
Yeah, except there are times when all of a sudden in the data stream we get a big bubble, if you will, or burst of values that are unexpected in the immediacy values, and we know we're onto something hot. So, for instance, we've had it when all of a sudden there was a flurry of language that was showing up around pharmaceuticals. I mentioned this, it was, I think, in November. A few days later, it came out about Merck and the Lipitor-style drugs and the heart problems, etc.
Very short term, I see.
Very short term, couple of days. We also had another blip about the Olympics in Greece that was referring to accidents and some of the main, and how there would be problems just before the opening, and sure enough, some of the Greek Olympiad athletes were in a motorcycle wreck. And we had that like 2 or 3 days before. So we have a very high degree of confidence in those. Usually, though, my best degree of confidence, we can say, hovers around 5 months.
Very good. Okay, we'll talk more about this. It's fascinating. I'll read a little bit from Part 4 of the current Alta report. And again, we're talking with Clif of his partner George Ure. He's not with us tonight, but they have been with us together several times. halfpasthuman.com is the website. This is really amazing. This has absolutely fascinated me from the first moment I found out about it, because I've been, as many of you have, most interested in the collective unconscious for a long time. And to find out now that it is in fact manifested in language on the mass internet, if carefully surveyed, is fascinating. Okay, back with Clif, and we're talking about halfpasthuman.com. The Alta reports, Part 4 is up right now, and I'm going to read just a little bit of this. We're talking about windows, very, very short term, medium term, and then 3 to 7 months seems to be one of Clif and George's favorite venues to work, as it were. Now, one interesting note for you newcomers, while this is fascinating to you, I'm sure, it is also fascinating to other people, trying to gain every possible advantage on the world stage to find out what to be prepared for. And I'm sure that our government, at some degree, is probably reading with great interest their work, Clif and George's, but they were able to find out, I guess it was an accident, they stumbled across someone else doing the same kind of research on the internet, surveying and surveilling the use of language. Tell us about that a little bit, if you would, Clif, again. Who else is doing it? So we were talking about, or I was talking about, the fact that this information is obviously of great interest to those who would seek to bend every advantage their way, and you found another entity doing similar work. And we've talked about this before, but I think our listeners would like to hear it, those who know nothing about this. So tell us who you found was also doing this.
We found that the Chinese army was doing this out of a specific little town actually to the west of the earthquake zone.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were researching language in a very serious way. At the time, their search methods were not quite as sophisticated as mine, but they were nonetheless got my attention. But their linguistic associations were very, very elegant. And from a computer viewpoint, they were quite something to read.
Were they scanning English?
Oh, sure. They're like I am, though. They're multi-language. Once you get the hang of this, then you can sit down, for instance, and translate the emotive values from English over to some languages fairly easily. Others, like Italian, for instance, the nuance, you really need somebody who's spoken it for a long time or is a native to help you out there. Other languages that are less traveled, if you will, such as Sanskrit, but they're also, or any of their variants, Pali, etc., the language itself gives you clues as to the emotional intent based on how the transliteration is done, so that part's taken care of. The Chinese were very good at it, though.
Well, that's interesting. they're aware of your work and probably read it quite vigorously, and that's interesting. Now they didn't steal your work. They have their own software, so this was apparently something that they developed in parallel to a degree with your work.
I would agree, and I don't think that we're 100% alone, just the two of us. We've found enough evidence that there is, if you will, a commercial party or a third party yet unnamed, a third player yet to be picked kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know really who to assign it to. We know some of the locations that it's operating out of, but it's done things, for instance, like trigger crack attacks against my setup here, and they appear to originate from specific areas in Poland and Italy and so forth. So it's actually quite kind of flattering to a certain extent that they figure I'm worth thinking with.
I would say that is interesting. Okay,